Good evening. I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. Extremely bad news from Iraq, from Anbar Province. You will recall Anbar Province was the center of the awakening. This is the surge of 2006, 2007. The Bush administration, General Petraeus, that was then. This is now. The news from Ramadi, the capital of Anbar Province, is that ISIS, the Islamic State, Daesh, have overrun all of the city. We're going to be very careful here what that means and what it means for the nation of Iraq, what it means for the defense of Baghdad, and also looking to the United States. What place does it have in this bad news? Bill Roggio of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy and his colleague Tom Joscelyn joined. Tom's going to take us to al-Nusra in Syria. These are rival organizations. They certainly do not in any fashion describe order. Bill, a very good evening to you. Ramadi falls to ISIS. Was this expected? This is a very large town. This looks like a significant victory for them. Good evening to you.
Good evening, John. Yes, Ramadi is the provincial capital of Anbar Province and the largest city in western Anbar. It's been under siege from the Islamic State since the Islamic State launched its offensive in Iraq in January of 2014. Remember, a big chunk of Anbar Province went under Islamic State control before the Islamic State even broke from Al-Qaeda and before, or Al-Qaeda actually ejected the Islamic State, and before the offensive over the summer that saw Mosul and other cities and towns throughout northern and central Iraq fall. So the Islamic State has been putting a lot of effort, and it came to fruition just last weekend. Expected, given the amount of effort and their capabilities and the deteriorating capabilities of the Iraqi security forces, I can't say I was all that surprised. I mean, look, they took large chunks of Iraq last summer, and they weren't going to stop there, even though they've had some setbacks on the battlefield in Tikrit and in other fringe areas where the Iraqi government can apply power. In Anbar, the Islamic State has been on the offensive for the past, I'd say, 6 months, and has been consolidating its control over the province. So I'm at the end of the day, I'm not surprised. Joe.
You report that they overran Camp Ramadi, which was the military base, the headquarters of the 8th Iraqi Brigade. Is that significant? And did they run away at Camp Ramadi the way they ran away from Mosul and the fight for Tikrit?
Yeah, it appears after the Islamic State launched its multiple. This is the really impressive thing is they've been over the course of days about 10 to 15 suicide bombers a day. I think that really puts the fear into the Iraqi security forces. They just don't seem to be able to handle that mentally when they see these trucks packed with explosives coming towards them. They just seem to run. They abandon. First, the Anbar Operations Command was first to fall. And think of that as a corps-level command. That'd be like Fort Bragg, basically, with 18th Airborne Corps. That'd be like that falling to an enemy. I mean, it's not just a small military base. The Anbar Operations Command was set up to direct all military operations in Anbar Province. That fell, and then the 8th Brigade base, which is a large base at Camp Ramadi, just south of Anbar Operations Command, fell hours later, maybe a half a day later. And it appears they just started to flee after the Islamic State launched its assault. Once they started entering the perimeter, the troops just bugged out. And one of the best, supposedly the best Iraqi Army divisions, the Golden Division, they just bugged out of Ramadi.
Tom Joscelyn reporting on the al-Nusra front, and a surprising detail. This is a graduating class. It's springtime. Graduation class is ordinary in the United States, but this is graduates at Idlib. Tom, a very good evening to you. Idlib is the large town that the al-Nusra front took control of in Syria some weeks ago. Why are they giving us propaganda pictures of a graduation?
Well, they want to show that their ranks are swelling and that, in fact, that they are still wildly popular inside Syria. And after the city of Idlib, which is the provincial capital of the province of the same name, fell to the jihadists in late March, it's clear the Nusra Front has been reorganizing really the anti-Assad rebellion inside Syria. And they've made a lot of gains in that regard, not just in the north, but also in the south. And the pictures of this training camps we see here in this camp are, easily over 100 fighters we can count. And according to some accounts on social media by jihadists, there was upwards of 300 fighters in this. Now, this is a pretty, significant number of trainees at this camp, but it just goes to show, quite the contrary of Al-Qaeda being on the run or decimated or any of those things that are actually multiplying their numbers greatly.
Some of this, Tom, looks familiar, sort of a training camp, say, about 1941, the basic training, toughening up. Diving through burning tires seems a strange detail, and climbing. But in any event, the athleticism of young men. This isn't unusual for al-Nusra, is it? This isn't the first time we've seen anything like this.
No, this is the usual. In fact, the motif of diving through the rings of fire is sort of a common theme that we've seen in jihadi propaganda going back years. They really love that for some reason. I don't know. I guess it's melodramatic. And obviously the pictures are meant to be propaganda pictures. They're meant to give you a sense that they're growing in very large numbers. But the truth of the matter is that this camp is not surprising given the operational details that we're able to verify about what the Nusra Front and its allies are doing in Syria. In fact, it's quite obvious that they are, gaining hundreds and hundreds of new recruits pretty regularly.
And al-Nusra, the conquest of Idlib, we talked about this several weeks ago. Has that proved to be a significant milestone for al-Nusra? Does this demonstrate something that they had been short of all these months?
Well, there are two different models here. The Islamic State basically says we're going to go at it ourselves. We're the only organization that counts. Swear allegiance to us, or we're going to try and run you over. And the Nusra Front has taken the exact opposite approach in terms of the anti-Assad rebellion. Now, remember, the Islamic State doesn't invest many of its resources, or much of its resources, in fighting Assad. It fights other rebels and then really is fighting government forces in Iraq and other sort of enemies in Kurdish areas and the like. But the Nusra Front is much more heavily invested in the anti-Assad rebellion, and what they're doing is they're trying to pool the resources of as many groups as they can that they can find to work with to basically push the gains against Assad. And what we've seen is that basically the jihadists, including the Nusra Front and its al-Qaeda allies, other al-Qaeda-linked organizations, are basically the spearhead for that coalition that's going after Assad.
Bill, you and your colleagues have often flagged the number of training camps across the whole length of Syria and into Iraq. This training camp, is it typical of all the rest of that, or is this propaganda exaggerating its significance?
No, in this case, I don't think they're exaggerating anything. They're showing the number of recruits that they have that are going through this bit of training. It's possible they're puffing up the pictures, but I tend to believe them in these cases, given the way they're operating tactically on the battlefield. They clearly, groups like, or the Nusra Front clearly has the manpower that it claims is going through the camps. And yeah, this is pretty indicative of what we're seeing at many of the camps. Some of the camps have a more established feel. Some of the camps that you see, the images have fewer people in them. That's often the case. But you see a lot of, as Tom mentioned, the same imagery. They like the jungle gym. They like going, doing the overhead ladder climb and crawling through the mud and going through burning hoops and things of that nature. It just has, it's very significant. We saw videos like this in the late 1980s. In the 1990s, Al-Qaeda put out videos like this, and I think they try to, it's sort of a homage almost to the old style video.
Right, movie quotes. Tom, is there a competition going on between al-Nusra and ISIS for recruits? Is that part of these recruiting films?
It is. The competition, I think the foreign fighters, it's always tough to get a gauge on, how many are flowing into the battlefields nowadays. There are reports that maybe the flow has been interrupted. One of the things the Islamic State was able to do early on was capitalize on the historical pipelines to its predecessor organizations, including Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and really swell its numbers there with recruits from North Africa and elsewhere. The Nusra Front also benefited from those pipelines, has been recruiting internationally, both recruit from the West and everywhere else. But what's interesting with the Nusra Front is that they're much more about trying to inculcate their ideology within the population of Syria. This is actually a key point that I think most people miss, because the Nusra Front and Al-Qaeda, what they've done is they've adopted a much more popular revolutionary model for their jihad. I find that to be very dangerous in the long run, because what they're trying to do is trying to woo people to their cause and convince them that their ideas are superior. And if there's not a counter-narrative and a counter-effort to convince people that, in fact, this is insidious and is all really evil, then, in fact, they can make a lot of headway that way. And, in fact, look at Nusra Front in Syria, whereas the Islamic State is hated and reviled by the other anti-Assad rebels. The Nusra Front is wildly popular, and that's, I think, very indicative of the difference in the models.
Tom Joscelyn and Bill Roggio, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy.